Welcome to Hiring Happy Humans, where we talk about all things HR with a variety of folks, from CEOs to community partners, sharing up-to-date trends, best practices, and our wild workplace stories. Each interview is designed to leave you with the knowledge to keep your sanity. I'm your host, Dawn Sipley, of Sipley the Best. Thanks for joining in, and let's jump into this week's episode.
Today, we want to welcome Mitchell Chubb, the owner of Chubb Law right here in Central Florida. Now, Mitchell is a particularly special guest. We are actually first cousins. So I am the oldest of all the cousins in the Chubb clan. So I'm just super excited to have my baby cousin on here today. It's been an amazing journey to watch him grow professionally, be able to be there as he makes strategic hires in his new law firm that he just launched last year after several years, many years as an attorney with other firms and even a partner in a firm. Mitchell, can you just tell us a little bit about where you're from and a little bit about you and your family? And then second, what really led you to the path to starting your own firm? Because that's not always the course for a lot of attorneys.
Yeah. So number one, thank you for having me, Dawn. Obviously, we've known each other a long time, as in I've known you my whole life, right? And
Yeah.
we grew up together, so being in this professional setting with you is awesome. And likewise, I would definitely say watching you grow and all of your success and, your journey is inspiring. And when I talk about you to other people, that's the word that comes to mind, is inspiring. Right?
Oh,
absolutely. So, for all the listeners, certainly you need to know Don's full story. It's unbelievable. And mine is, pales in comparison, but a little bit about me. So I grew up, as Don mentioned, right here in Central Florida. We've been in Lake Mary for basically my whole life, the past 30 years. Went to Lake Mary High School and then to UCF. And then I went to law school at Barry right here in Orlando. So I haven't gone far. I'm kind of boring in that respect, but I do love Central Florida and that's why I've stayed here. I've been married for coming up on, I should know this right off the top of my head, but 12 years this past June. Yeah. My wife and I have two young boys. They're 4 and 6, and so full of energy and fun, as Dawn well knows, right? I've been
nice to have littles in the family again. Mine are 19 and 14, so that's just such a fun season of life. So I've enjoyed having them.
Yes, very, very fun ages. My favorite season so far, right? With all due respect to the baby stage, I love where we're at right now.
Your father was like that too. He didn't care for the infants unless he could go get them into trouble or have an adventure.
Yeah. So I've been a lawyer for coming up on 10 years in October. And the first 9 of those, I worked at other firms. So I was an associate partner at one firm, and I made the decision to make the jump and start my own firm in March of 2021. I'm 15 months in, or whatever that math is now. I wish I had done it sooner, right? Is what I say, but I'm a believer everything happens for a reason, and so nothing was lost in my journey. So we do strictly personal injury and the plaintiff side of personal injury. And so I know for a lot of the listeners, they're small business owners. And so I'm kind of like the enemy, right? And that's okay. I understand the stigma that surrounds what I do. Obviously, I have a different perspective, but unless you're in it every day, I can certainly understand why people feel the way they do about personal injury lawyers. And I think we're going to get into that further the more the conversation goes on. But kind of where do you want me to go next?
So when you get involved typically when tragedy has hit, there has been some kind of auto accident, some type of personal injury. One of their employees has been hurt. And for me, as an HR professional, one of the things that I lose sleep about is employee safety and how those types of things are, one, prevented from happening, and then two, how they're handled in the process, because the financial impact of one, it happening, and then two, handling it poorly can get extremely, extremely expensive. So you're right, you might be viewed a little bit on the other side of the table by small business owners, but the reason that I wanted to bring you in here today is really to educate us on what small business owners can do before the accident happens. Like, what do we need to know about our insurance? What do we need to know about our policies, maybe our handbooks that can assist, or even training with stopping bad things from happening. And then two, just walk us around some of the best practices once there has been a situation that's occurred.
Yeah. So taking those one by one, prevention, what you can do to protect yourself. I mean, by far, number one is make sure that you have sufficient and adequate insurance coverage. And so I think that's an entirely different conversation as to what's sufficient and adequate. And I would encourage all business owners to consult with a professional on that, right? So, most of us have an insurance agent that can advise us on those things.
Not about the premium price then?
Right. And that was going to be the next thing that I said is, don't be cheap here, right? Insurance, and I have this conversation kind of on the other side of the table with my clients all the time. It's, you don't realize what you need until you need it. And so rely on a professional to advise you of that and make sure that, you're insured, right? So that's by far number one. I can tell you personally, and obviously I can't speak for all personal injury lawyers, but I can tell you the majority of us are only interested in insurance money, right? So, I would understand as a small business owner, if you get some sort of letter or notification that there's been a personal injury case initiated against your business, you're worried about your business, right? Most of the time, definitely for me, but I would say for even most of my colleagues, we're interested in insurance money, right? And so make sure that you're sufficiently insured, right? Rely on your professional for that. Kind of touching on, well, do you have any questions for me with regard to that?
Yeah, no, I think that's pretty straightforward. Just, the person to ask is not an attorney for that. It would be an insurance professional to really sit down and see what your liabilities and risk are for whatever industry that you're working in, and to make sure that you even have coverage that, you don't have coverage gaps, I guess.
Yes. Yeah. And that's a great point, obviously. And so, from our side, where we see the most cases involving small businesses is certainly in the auto realm, right? So the businesses that have lots of people out there on the road, right? It's just, that makes sense. And so in those circumstances, certainly consult with your insurance agent and make sure, like Dawn said, there are no gaps, right? And you're covered under, all scenarios, ideally, but certainly the most common. And you also feel good that there's sufficient coverage there, right? So that's number one. I would encourage people to ask about excess and umbrella policies. Hopefully your agent is offering that stuff to you. But if you've never heard that, and I'm saying that, and you're hearing it for the first time, ask about that, right? Generally, they're not too expensive, and it just provides an extra layer of coverage on top of what you already have.
So once an accident happens, you get a phone call from your employee, hey, this just happened. What do you do, like, in the moment?
In the moment, sure. In the moment, I would say number one, well, let me answer your question. In the moment, document everything, right? it's worth having, you or somebody from your team that you trust go into the scene of the accident and just document everything, right?
Videos,
Yes.
still photos, all
Yes.
angles. Okay.
Yes. You never know what's going to be important down the road. And most of our cases, surprisingly, there's very little from the scenes of the accident, right? It's actually, it's fairly uncommon for there to be extensive documentation of an accident. And so it's always helpful, right? And in most scenarios, I think you would probably worry about having to produce that stuff through the case. In a lot of scenarios, that's going to be protected. And the other side, meaning my client and I, are not going to be able to get that stuff. So that's number one. I would even back up a little bit before that, and just as far as prevention and making sure that that you're protected. So number one, have policies and procedures that you follow in the event of an accident, right? And so in those, they're going to say document everything, right?
Yeah.
Dawn can certainly help you with that. But don't be unprepared, right? If and when an accident occurs, that's number one. And so have policies and procedures in place for, hey, these are all the things that we do to make sure that we're covering all our bases, right? And do you have any other follow-up questions on that?
So policies and procedures, that would really be the employee handbook. And then really the part that I notice is this handbook exists in a closet in a corner, but nobody knows like what it said. And when these situations end up happening, so when was the last time you were trained on the forklift? Or when was the last time you were updated on policies and procedures? Doing the training, knowing the policies is really the key, I think, to prevention, not just that it exists and that it's there. To say that there's training and then there not be, does that put you in more liability?
It's certainly not good, right?
Okay.
Right. So and those are certainly questions that we ask, right? During the depositions, and what I see most commonly is what you're describing, like, maybe there's a policy that exists, but maybe the employee who got in the crash knew about it, or maybe they haven't, or maybe they read it on their first day. And
you did your job as the employer to set forth a high standard, and it was their decision to violate, their understanding that they were going against the rules. Doesn't that help reduce the company liability a smidge? Yeah.
And I think right. And it's complex, and each case is obviously different, but I think from a company standpoint and a business owner standpoint, put in the effort and time. And with that said, as Don mentioned, I'm a small business owner. We're super busy, and that is, we're generally dealing with immediate issues, but this is worth setting aside the time and think about it and put effort into it. And then, in the event there is something that comes up, that effort shows through, right? Yeah. And it matters, and it helps. So, I think where business owners can get themselves in trouble is when it's very clear that they've done, very little or nothing, right?
Right.
So does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. So then once it happens, go out, drop what you're doing, document, and then, so say the employee is headed to the hospital. Is it appropriate for you as an employer to go to the hospital with them, or is there HIPAA things around that? Like, where's the line of caring at on behalf of the employer for one of your employees without violating things like that?
Yeah, I think, it somewhat depends on your relationship with the employee, but I think it makes sense to go to the hospital if you feel that's the right thing to do. With respect to HIPAA, I think that the medical personnel will advise you, right? So if there's something that you can't do, they'll tell you. Right. And so generally in that situation, outside of a COVID world, obviously, but generally in that situation, it's going to be what does the employee want, right? So I think that makes sense, right?
Okay.
Just you do care about your employees. We all do, and so treat them like a human, right? Like my employees are like family to me, and so certainly if I'm in that situation, I'm going to go to the hospital.
So, I mean, if someone's in an accident and they can't return to work, is terminating them or suspending them or writing them up for a wrong that they did during an accident something that they should be doing then, or should they allow the person to recover? Like on the risk mitigation side, how do employers react that way?
Yeah. So this probably isn't going to make it in. That's a little bit outside of my sandbox.
Okay. Right.
I can try to answer it, and then you can use what you want. Yeah. I would defer to HR professional on that, or HR lawyer. But I think my answer would be, again, going back to prevention and thinking ahead and planning for these situations. I think clear policies and procedures on this kind of thing makes sense, right? And so what we see a lot we call them trucking cases, but semi cases, is these crashes, these accidents, they matter a ton, and they can affect you on the federal level with respect to your licensing. And so they have specific ways of dealing with that stuff.
Okay. Now, once notified, should an employer contact their own attorney just to figure out how to move forward with certain things? Is it worth kind of spending that money on the front end when you don't know if litigation is headed your way?
Right. Great question. Once something happens, one, document everything, but two, very, very quickly after that, notify your insurance company. So they're also going to do their own investigation. They're, in some scenarios, they're going to send people out and sometimes even experts out to the scene of the crash to document everything. And, with respect to whether or not you need a lawyer, most likely you don't need to hire one right off the bat right there, because your insurance policy will include that, right? So notify the insurance company. Again, that's why you have them, to protect you. And so they're going to run with it. But what I was referring to earlier, as far as documenting everything, it can't hurt to, for you to do that yourself.
Right.
They have a very big financial interest, obviously, in what's going on. And so they're going to do everything that they think is appropriate given the circumstances of the accident. Right. And so if it progresses to a level where they think there needs to be an attorney involved, they will hire that attorney. So, yeah.
Perfect. So once the accident happens and they've contacted an attorney, they've been reached out to and told that the individual is now represented, what are some best practices that they can have? Because that's not going to sit well, right? And they still have to see this person every day. Do you have any advice around just managing all of that and what that looks like, do's and don'ts, like trying to coerce the employee or trying to convince them to drop the attorney? Or
So the situation you're describing, just so I make sure we're on the same page, the employee has an attorney, or the other person in the crash, in the accident, has an attorney, or both?
I guess either or.
Yeah. So, generally what we will deal with is so say an employee is driving a company truck, they're in an accident and they're at fault, and the other person involved in the accident is hurt, that's who we'll represent, right? And so at some point, the business owner will be notified that we're involved, right? I assume that any communications that you have with the employee involved are going to come out, and govern yourself accordingly, right?
Right.
So
don't type anything you don't want to read out loud in the court of law.
Yes. So assume it's all going to come out. Certainly the employee's going to be asked, potentially you as the owner could be asked down the road under oath, hey, did you talk to so-and-so and what was said, right? So assume it's going to all come out, and govern yourself accordingly, I think would be my answer on that, right? Yeah. Certainly no reprimands in writing or anything like that, right?
Okay. Awesome. What are some areas where you've seen business owners stumble once you reached out to them and said, hey, we put on notice, we're moving forward, here's our filing? Like, what are some bad moves that they can do to really kind of make a bad situation worse?
Yeah. So if we're looking at before any of this happens, and specifically for the businesses and the business owners who have employees operating company vehicles out on the roads, make sure that you feel like you've done a background check on this person, right? That's going to be operating a company vehicle. You've checked on their driving history, which you can do. Yes. Make sure that you feel comfortable with that person operating a company vehicle, right? Based on those things. And so, a good way to think of that is, if your daughter or your mom is out there on the roadway, like, are you comfortable with this employee driving a big truck or van around, right? So do your due diligence on the front side. Dawn can certainly help people, with the background information, but you would be shocked at how many times I've seen business owners, and again, I get it, we're all super busy, but they just have done very little to no due diligence on the front side. And then something inevitably happens and we get involved, and all that is brought to light. And that's not a good situation for the business.
Right. We usually provide guidelines to our employers that really 3 points or less on an MVR. We look at criminal background to make sure that there's no, situations around vehicles with that, like armed robbery or, grand theft auto or something. So yeah, I've seen companies not put people on insurance and notify their insurance company that an individual is driving because their MVR is too bad to qualify to be able to drive. Right. So they just don't tell anybody. And it's just like, you have no idea what you're opening. That one thing can just, the pain that you think is causing you not to be able to find another more qualified driver, that is nothing but pales nothing in comparison to that bad driver being uninsured, the insurance company not knowing that they're operating the vehicle and then them getting into an accident. So cutting corners like that is catastrophic.
Right. And Dawn, you would know better than me, but I understand it's hard to find good people, certainly, and even just people in general. And so I get it, but that's not, you don't want to cut corners there. And I have a current case, and obviously I'm not going to give away any names, but it was a small business, and their employee got in a bad crash with my client, and I deposed the business owner, and he had done basically nothing to look at the background of this employee. And he he believed, I don't think this is common, but he believed that he testified that he didn't have access to that kind of thing. And it was on the insurance company to do. So just, take initiative. Again, I know we're busy, but this area is worth your time. Put in the time and effort on the front side.
Okay. Is there anything else that kind of stands out to your mind that are either best practices to do once contacted by an attorney?
I think there's so many different answers to that question. It's hard to cover them all, but if you assume that everything's going to come out right through the court case, you can kind of use that as a guiding light to model your actions after that happens, right? Yeah.
Now, say a judgment is brought. Share with the audience what that looks like. So there's an accident, the attorney is hired, they're found at fault, and a judgment is made against them. So in that judgment, what does that typically look like? I know there's going to be insurance money, there might be personal monies, punitive damages, fines, things like that. What are all the different ways that part kind of unfolds, right? Because a lawsuit's a lawsuit, but the reality is that to get to a conclusion of making someone whole again. So it seems like an abstract idea to a lot of people, and they come to me and go, well, we've done it this way for years and it's never been an issue. And they just really have no idea. First off, the process is brutal and time consuming and emotional and expensive. But then at the end, that judge's gavel is going down and there's going to be a decision made. What does it look like afterwards?
Yeah. So let me do it this way. That's a great question. Okay. Just describe kind of what they can expect in the process, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And this is generally speaking, right? Your normal, that this is specific to a car accident case involving an employee. So accident happens, business owner, notifies their insurance company engages with our firm. This is all at this stage of the process, we call it pre-suit, meaning there has been no formal lawsuit filed with the court system. So in your normal motor vehicle accident case, pre-suit can be an extended period of time, depending on the case. And most personal injury lawyers will give the insurance company a chance to settle or resolve the case prior to filing the lawsuit with the court system. Okay. So, I obviously have a different take on this, but as a business owner on the other side of this, your insurance company should be keeping you in the loop and communicating with you as things progress. And honestly, the business owner, although, it's uncomfortable, their interest should be in the insurance company settling the case and putting an end to it, so they can move on with the more important things in their lives, right? So most lawyers will give the insurance company a chance to settle the case. That could be the end of it. If they can't come to an agreement, then that's when a formal lawsuit would be filed with the court system. And then you're in litigation, right? We've all heard that term. And certainly that's time consuming for the business. There will be documents requested. There will be most likely depositions of your people, right? That can last a long time because everything in the court system is slow. And, it's worth mentioning at any point in time during litigation, the case could be settled, right? Okay. And so from our side, there are natural points in the case where it makes sense to engage the insurance company and see if they're interested in resolving the case. If they don't, then the final step, right? The final thing that would happen is trial. And so those are almost always jury trials. And again, as a business owner, it's taken a lot of your time, right?
And you have to attend those, right? It's not like you can just send your attorneys and not be in attendance.
Yeah, so you would obviously have attorneys at this point, and generally the attorney is going to want somebody there from the company, right? And so we call it an empty chair. An empty chair doesn't look good to the jury. So whether it's you as the owner, yeah, you want to humanize it, right? Because on paper it's just John Smith Incorporated or whatever it is. So you want to humanize that. So yeah, you'd have to show up. The employee would be there. It's probably going to be at least a week, and then after the trial, the jury would render a verdict, and then that's when the judgment would come, right?
Okay. Yeah. Now, you are a little bit different than most attorneys in Florida because you are very comfortable doing trials. If I'm correct, don't most attorneys usually kind of settle out at some point? They're not eager to go into court and go through that process?
Yeah, I would say that's generally true. I don't want to talk bad about my colleagues, but I would say
it's a preferred business model. You either have a business model to process paperwork, do that, or you have one that can go up against big names. I don't know if you can share some of the names, but I know from just knowing you so well that big national global companies, not your mom and pop, PI attorney in town, might not want to go up against like a huge tire company or a car manufacturer. And that's something that you have experience in doing is doing trial up against large companies.
Yeah. So I mean, Dawn knows I love sports, and I sort of feel like there's an element of it's like white collar sports, and what I do, honestly, is kind of how I feel about it. So I enjoy trial. Yes, that's something we've done in the past. If I look at what we're doing and what we want to do for our clients, we'll do whatever it takes to get them a fair and just result. And obviously I know in this setting, again, there's probably assumptions that I'm super greedy. I don't think I am, right? Dawn could speak to that too. And it's something where I look at it as we're dealing with the insurance companies, and so many times we touched on earlier, it's like treating your employees as humans. The insurance companies, don't treat my clients as humans lots of times, right?
Right.
And so that's why I believe in what we do.
Okay. Now, I know we've been speaking a lot to the business audience, but at the end of the day, all business owners are individuals, and we're all people, and we can all get into an auto accident at any given time. If someone is hurt and they need a personal injury attorney and they don't know who to call, what are some good questions for someone who needs an attorney to ask when they're trying to shop around for that type of service?
Sure. So obviously we've all seen the billboards and the commercials, right? I'm sure as you hear me say that, there's a name that pops in your mind, right?
Born and raised here, he was.
Right. So, I think that from our side, if you're shopping for a personal injury attorney, number one, it's ask to speak to the attorney that's going to be handling the day-to-day on your case, right?
Not an intake coordinator.
Right.
Okay.
So you should be able to do that, right? You want access to your attorney. That's important. So, number one, to me, it's that, right? Who's going to be handling my case day to day? Because that's what matters. The firm name ultimately, it matters a little bit, but not a ton. It matters more who's going to be doing the day to day. And then can I speak to that person, right?
Right.
So that's number one. Of course, do your due diligence on background and that sort of thing.
You can check the bar or something to make sure that they're in good standing if they've ever had reprimands.
Yep.
Okay.
So that if you just Google Florida bar member search, it'll pop up and you can type in any attorney's name and see their history for the past 10 years. That's a good resource. I think you can ask attorneys, us personal injury attorneys, very specific questions on your case, right? If you had my type of case before and how'd you do, and are you willing to litigate the case if that's what it takes, those sort of things. But ultimately, you need to be able to trust your lawyer, your attorney. And so you got to talk to them to make that evaluation, in my opinion. So to me, that's the biggest thing, honestly.
Right. Because you can not love the outcome of the case, but you should feel well represented.
Correct. Yeah, that's a great way to say it.
Right. I think the most tragic thing is to feel misrepresented or underrepresented or poorly represented and really hate the outcome because you never got your day. But at the end of the day, if you feel that the attorney did what was within the parameters of the law, they represented the truths of the case, they mitigated whatever damages that they could, and they presented you in a way that was truthful and in your best interest. Sometimes we have to pay for our consequences, and that's not the attorney's fault.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to say it. And again, that kind of goes back to communication to me, right? So personal injury cases, just like the name implies, it's a personal thing. And you need to make sure that you're able to communicate your story to your attorney so he or she can represent you adequately, like you were mentioning, right?
Right.
So
I'm curious, you mentioned the billboards. What is your thought on those billboards? Is that something that should be allowed? Do you feel like it's almost misrepresented?
So I think lawyers should be able to advertise. There was a time when lawyers couldn't advertise. And obviously that changed and we see it everywhere. It personally, and this is a personal opinion, I don't love a lot of the current advertising campaigns and just the kind of the stigma that it creates for what we do, right?
Right.
And some of
it dollarizes pain just a little bit too simplistically. $1.1 million, but the poor feller don't have any legs.
Exactly.
Like, what is that money worth? Like, really, at the end of the day. So big dollars are great because that's all you have left to bargain for. But I don't feel like it fully represents like everything that's involved in the case. And then you think, and oftentimes people think that their cases are worth so much, and it doesn't give the other side of the story of what was lost, in exchange for those dollars. So I think it puts a false sense of windfall in some people's minds.
Absolutely, I totally agree. Being in it every day, I can almost assure you that the people that you see holding the giant checks, you don't want to go through what they've been through that warranted that check. I can almost disagree or guarantee you that it wasn't worth it for them, right? And it was likely over multiple years and really, really affected their life during those years and probably affects their life in the years to come too. So I agree with you. I agree with your take on it, right? And the other thing I would say is some of the other ones are just like so corny. It's like, what we do is real and serious, or at least that's the way I feel about it. And that also just kind of provides this stigma or feeling about what we do that I don't feel like is accurate, at least, at my firm. So
right. Now, I know we kind of dove pretty deep into auto accidents and things like that, but the word personal injury encompasses like a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always found your stories quite fascinating, especially when you were doing a little bit of product liability, because that was never really something that I had thought like a lot about. The one particular case, it was some kind of like lawn machine that they were trying to start, and they had put it between their legs and it exploded, and well, golly, you don't want to miss those bits and pieces.
Yes.
I know that's more product liability, but in personal injury, like what, just name off some quick, like what's happened, what can happen, how do I know if I've been involved in something, like what is deemed personal injury?
Yeah.
Because me being a dodo bird and falling down on a sidewalk probably doesn't have much litigation if I broke my arm.
Right. So personal injury encompasses anything where somebody's injured and it was due to the fault of someone else or some other entity, right? So that could be fall cases, as you mentioned, if there was a reason that you fell and whatever the condition was shouldn't have been there, right? That could be one. Medical malpractice is under that umbrella. Products liability, as you mentioned. So in the personal injury arena, there's a product that is defective, and as a result of that defect, it hurts somebody, right?
So like bad seatbelt, bad tires, on vehicles, explosive devices, the boards. Didn't we have those roller boards that blew up and vapes that blow up? Have you ever done a vape case?
I have, yes.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes.
Interesting.
I've seen some gnarly stuff from those vape devices, right?
Yeah.
It seems like they've kind of curtailed those issues, but for a while the batteries were making those things just explode. They were like pipe bombs. So
wow.
Yeah. Wow. So those would be product cases. Yes. The one you mentioned, it was a leaf blower. So
I just remember going, oh no, there's no amount of money worth that.
Yes. No, it was not anything that I would wish on anybody. That's what I'd say about that one.
Well, I know the McDonald's hot coffee case has always gotten a lot of to-do about it, and very few people really realize the facts of that case and the absolute morbid scarring that woman underwent, and how hot, not just hot, like scalding, melt your skin off hot that coffee was, and how they had been cited over and over and over again that their coffee was too hot. So again, showing that you try to not, that you follow the rules, that you keep inside of parameters, and then once it happens and all that. So yeah. That kind of stuff. What about like long-term injury things like mesothelioma? I'm not saying that right.
Right.
But like with extended exposure to things, is that personal injury stuff where there's not an accident, but it's more of a long-term exposure to something that caused you chronic issues?
Yeah, that would fall under the umbrella of personal injury, for sure. Like the asbestos, I think you're referring to the asbestos stuff, right? There's lots of class actions on that stuff now, and so it's sort of like its own beast. But yeah, that falls under the umbrella, and potentially we could help somebody like that.
Okay. So I ask all my guests that come on the show one question at the end, and that is, what would you tell your younger professional self as you were kind of getting your career kick-started?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think I would, I think I would say to my younger self, put in the work and effort on yourself, right? So develop like this awesome warrior mindset where you're not afraid of anything, and you're going to find a way, and then really embrace that in your life and career, and take risks, right? I wish I had taken more risks in my 20s, honestly. But
because then what did you have to lose?
Yeah.
Living on a shoestring budget,
right?
No kids, no family to drag through the mud with you. So why not play and see the results?
Yeah. So I think it's really work on yourself, your mindset, the ability to be positive and believe in yourself, and then be willing to do whatever it takes to be successful. Or if you fail, that's okay, and learn from it, right? And move on.
Yeah.
So
I think when I love to ask older people that are a few seasons ahead of me, what would you do, or what would you do differently? I think that's why when I said, what would be the one question, this is it, is it's never the things that they the regrets are never the things that they did. It was always the things that they failed to do.
Yeah. Right.
All the failures, you seem to learn something from it, but the regrets really come from not having taken the chance at all.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I feel like I've just in the past few years started to like understand that, right? But it's powerful. So go for it, right?
Absolutely.
Whatever that is, go for it. That's what I think. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Mitch, for coming on the show today. Just such a pleasure to have you. If you have any personal injury needs or any questions, Mitch is the owner of Chubb Law. Him and his wife own and operate that with their crew down there right in Lake Mary. Feel free to reach out. All his contact information will be in the description.
Thank you for having me, Dawn. And I would just add, any small business owners, if there's something that I said that doesn't make sense to you, or you just want clarity, I'm happy to answer those questions too.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Mitch. Have a blessed day.
Thank you.
Thanks again for spending time with us today. If you want more HR stories and resources, go to simplythebest.com to join our newsletter. That's SIPLEY. Until next time, stay happy.